What is up, YouTube? This is Gregory Durth. I am the Atheist Guard, and I'm doing another video in my introductions series, just covering some real basic stuff before I start getting into the deeper subject matter. And in this video, I wanted to cover some basic terms that I'll be using, like agnosticism, atheism, knowledge, and belief. Now, dictionaries define usage. They don't define actual meaning. Words don't have an intrinsic meaning. They have usage. It's a common misconception people have that, quoting a dictionary is some sort of an authority on what a word actually means. It's just not the case. Words have multiple meanings. That's why they have, 1, 2, 3, and 4 in a dictionary explaining the different ways the same word can be used. Now, when I'm talking about atheism versus theism, I like the model that posits these as categories, the overarching categories under which everything else can reside. That is, theism is a belief in God or gods. Doesn't matter how you believe it, what kind of God you believe in, that's what a theist is. They have a belief in God. That's all it means. So you can be a deist, you can be a pantheist, you can be a Muslim, Christian. If you have some God belief, you are a theist of a certain type, like a Christian or whatever. So that's the overarching umbrella under which all other types of God beliefs reside. So the specifics don't matter. If you're a theist, you believe in a God, it's a non-specific, very basic category. It's only based on that one assertion, a God exists, theist. Atheist, of course, is someone who doesn't accept that. Now, you might not accept that a God exists because there's insufficient evidence. That would be a rational skeptic that becomes an atheist. You might not accept that a God exists because you're angry at God or something like that. That would be irrational, because your anger towards an entity doesn't make that entity not exist. I am a rational skeptic, which makes me an atheist when I apply my rational skepticism to the claims that theists put forth about gods. I haven't found any of them convincing, thus I am an atheist. It's an involuntary state for me. I have no choice but to be an atheist because I haven't been convinced. It's not like I could pretend to be convinced or act like I'm convinced if I haven't seen a good reason to be convinced. So that's what an atheist is to me, under the rational skeptic type. Now, why am I so out of breath? I think I got a lung infection or something. Anyways, agnostic is another one of those terms that can have multiple meanings, multiple usages, as it were. I like the model where agnosticism addresses what you know, because after all, the root of agnosticism is a Greek word for knowledge, gnosis. They even sound the same because that's how, the etymology of that word works. So it addresses what you claim to know or not know. If you're an agnostic, you claim you don't know. If you're agnostic about theism, you don't know whether or not a God exists. And I get this concept that there's a middle ground of being undecided as to the question of whether or not a God exists. I get that. And a lot of people want to use agnostic in that sense, saying that I just haven't decided yet whether or not I believe in a God. Okay, I kind of understand where they're coming from. The problem is theism and atheism are binary. You can only be one or the other. There is no middle ground. If you're undecided as to whether or not a God exists, you don't currently have a belief that a God exists. Thus, you are an atheist, at least in the weak sense. They got this term weak atheism, which basically means I don't accept the proposition that a God exists as true. You're not saying it's false. You're not saying you think that no gods exist. You just say, I haven't been convinced. I'm an atheist because I don't have a belief that a God exists. And if you're undecided, then you haven't decided to believe that a God exists. Thus, you're that type of atheist, under that type of definition. So this is the usage I'm using for these terms. Now, agnostic is an adjective that you can apply to the nouns theist or atheist. So you can be a Gnostic atheist, a Gnostic theist, you could be an agnostic atheist, and an agnostic theist. Of the four options, an agnostic atheist, I would think, is the most rational position to take, because you're not claiming you know that this type of a being can't exist. That's something you really can't know, except to a high degree of certainty. See, I reject absolute certainty. I'm kind of like, I'm with Matt Dillahunty on this whole concept of absolute certainty being an utterly useless measure for anything. So when I say we know something, it's a true justified belief, and that justification is evidence-based. So if you have a belief that you can back up with evidence, you gain a certain amount of confidence in that belief. If you have extremely high confidence in that belief because of the evidence that backs it up, you can say you know it. You can say it's knowledge at that point. That you don't just believe it, but you know it's true because there's so much evidence backing it up that it's, you know, your confidence is extremely high. You don't have to have absolute confidence because that's almost impossible. There's nothing you can be absolutely certain about, except for perhaps that the logical absolutes work. I'll be getting into those later too. That's one of those mind-numbing conversations that people want to have with atheists a lot, is about these logical absolutes, as if it's some huge mystery. They're just tautologies. They're just truth. They are truth by definition. It's nothing magical about them. It's just A is A. Anyways, I'll go into the logical absolutes later. What I'm going to try to focus on in this video is just those four categories. So agnostic atheist would be the most rational because there isn't sufficient evidence to justify a belief in a God, and claiming that you know something that you really can't know, you know, in this case, the non-existence of something, I don't think is really that sound of a position to have. Now, I put a qualifier on that, and I'll explain it when I get to the Gnostic atheist definition. Now, next in line, however, in terms of rationality, would be the agnostic theist, because at least they're claiming, at least they can admit that they don't know for sure, but they still have a belief in a God. So they're a little less rational than an atheist because they're accepting a proposition as true that can't be demonstrated to be true, but at least they're not claiming they know it. So they're at least that intellectually honest that they're not asserting that they have a high degree of certainty, that they have a high confidence level in that belief. They still have an irrational belief, they just don't have a high confidence level in it. Now, the next in line as far as irrationality goes would be the Gnostic atheist. I put this under Gnostic theist because I think Gnostic theist is like utterly crazy. Gnostic atheist is arguably crazy, if you go with an absolute knowledge type of definition. See, a lot of atheists will say that they know no gods exist, just like they know Superman doesn't exist or Bigfoot doesn't exist. Actually, I don't think many people would actually say they know Bigfoot doesn't exist. They would just say they don't believe Bigfoot exists because there isn't any evidence for it yet. But it's possible that some sort of a primate type of creature lives in the woods and stuff that we just haven't discovered yet. There's a lot of species we don't know of. So that's not out of the realm of possibility. We're not talking something magical like a Superman or a god or something like that. So a Gnostic atheist would say they know a God doesn't exist to the same degree of certainty that they know unicorns don't exist, the Loch Ness Monster, arguably in the same category because it's just so outside of the possibilities. Although, like Bigfoot, that's basically an animal that could exist under some weird circumstance. Maybe some plesiosaurs survived the KT event. I mean, I really should restrict this to magical type of entities like fairies or flying spaghetti monsters, that kind of thing. We know they don't exist to an extremely high degree of certainty. In addition to the absence of evidence for them, you know, we can claim that we know these things don't exist all on pretty much equal footing. I would say a God qualifies in that same category of nonsensical entities that we can just say, you know what, I know there's no God. And then you would be a Gnostic atheist that is potentially rational. You know, I still like the agnostic atheist category better because you're not claiming knowledge at all. You have no burden of proof. You know, you're just saying I reject the claims that theists make about gods as unsupported. So I can't believe in a God. I'm not going to even make a claim of knowledge saying I know no gods exist. I'm not even going to bother with that mess because it's pointless. There's no point in even saying that. Like, why would I go around advertising that I believe and I know no unicorns exist? Why would I even have that position? There's no need to say I know no unicorns exist. It's stupid to believe that they do exist. Irrational to believe that they do exist. Yeah, stupid's a good word for it too. But a Gnostic theist, that's when it really gets problematic. I mean, we got people that claim they believe a God exists for whatever reason, even though there's no evidence to support it. Well, I would say certainly there's some anecdotal crap out there that if you compile enough anecdotal stuff, you might get this illusion of evidence, but the plurality of anecdote is not evidence. There's insufficient evidence to justify a belief in a God, and there's no good evidence to suggest that a God exists. But they not only believe it, they claim to know it. And in that sense, actually, with the theists I talk to that are Gnostic theists, they do claim absolute knowledge that a God exists. So they're actually using that absolute knowledge label that I think is completely, useless. I mean, there's nothing you know absolutely. Nothing. There's absolutely nothing that you know absolutely, other than the logical absolutes, because they necessarily have to be true, because that's what they are. So these are the definitions I'm going to be using when I talk in my videos, that there's this two overarching categories, atheism and theism, and underneath those two categories you have all the religions under theism, the religions that include a God, and under atheism you can be a whole mess of things besides being an atheist. But as long as you don't believe in a God, you're an atheist. As long as you don't currently have a belief that God exists, or that you reject the claim a God exists as not being supported by evidence, that you haven't been convinced that a God exists, you are an atheist of some stripe or another. And agnosticism and Gnosticism are just adjectives that you attach to those categories to define your knowledge state. So you have a belief state, which is theism or atheism, and you have a knowledge state, the level of your conviction, the level of certainty that you have about your belief. And that's your Gnostic or agnostic labels. Let's see. I think I'm going to leave this video off at that. I'm going to do another video on what an epistivist is. And this is a term that I came across watching some Aaron Ra videos. Look him up. His videos are awesome. Aronra. Just type it into YouTube. Man has excellent production quality, and he is wickedly sharp, to put it lightly. He covers everything from science to the great debate itself. And he would actually claim he's a Gnostic atheist. Gnostic atheist is often the same thing as a strong atheist. Agnostic atheist is often the same thing as a weak atheist. It really depends on who you're talking to. These words have different usages, but that's the way I see those strong and weak labels being used, is basically agnostic versus Gnostic when it comes down to it. But he actually claims he knows no God exists, and he gives decent reasons for having that belief. I don't agree with him on everything, and I think he goes a step too far in a few of his arguments against God, and I think it's kind of dumb to go into an argument to demonstrate that a God doesn't exist in the first place, because why would we need to take on the burden of proof at all? Let the guys making the positive claim prove their point and disregard it until they've proven their point. That which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. That's where it should be. Just leave it at that. But he goes a step further, and he has he has interesting arguments for why he not only thinks that the theist claims aren't true, but that he knows that they're false. It's interesting. I don't necessarily agree, but I do enjoy his videos. Definitely look him up. But he's the guy who he calls himself an epistemist, basically someone who rejects faith as a mechanism for belief. And I'll go into that in a lot of detail in another video, because I'm going to define faith using different sources and all this. Anyways, thanks a lot, YouTube, and I'll catch you later.